Welcome to the Attentive Church Leadership Podcast by Leighton Ford Ministries. I'm Kevin Ford. This podcast is designed to help you become a more effective and compassionate church leader. Each episode dives into essential topics like active listening, building trust, fostering community, and leading through change. With expert guests and practical advice, you'll find plenty of tips and insights to help you with empathy, integrity, and transparency, and mentor the next generation. Whether you're a seasoned pastor or just starting out in ministry, we hope that you'll join us each episode to enhance your leadership skills and to make a meaningful impact in your faith community.
Hello and welcome to the Attentive Church Leadership Podcast. My name is Tim Helms and I serve on the staff at Leighton Ford Ministries. I'm the production manager and I also am the TCI administrator. And we've been going through the book, the Attentive Church Leadership book, written by Kevin Ford and Jim Singleton for our podcast episodes. And we've been going through the different chapters. And today we're talking about chapter 5, which is entitled, Is the Tail Wagging the Dog? And we've been highlighting through the episodes of the podcast different people that are mentioned in the book or highlighted in the book. And in this chapter, Kevin and Jim talk about their relationship with First Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the pastor of that church, who is Pastor Tom Hall. He's now retired, and he's had a storied career. He was 30 years in the military as a colonel in the Air Force, retired, went to seminary, and then became the pastor of First Church in Pittsburgh. And it just has a tremendous story. And if you haven't had an opportunity to read the book or to get to that chapter yet, we would definitely encourage you to do that because it's such a unique situation that God really took from point A to point B and did amazing things, which I hope we will get to hear about today. So welcome to you, Pastor Tom, today on our podcast.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. We found out that we have a lot of things in common. I kind of knew from hearing where he lived that he probably was a Steeler fan, and my mom bought me a Pittsburgh Steeler lunchbox in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live, when I was 10 years old, and I've been a fan ever since. So we've talked a lot about that, being a fan of Pittsburgh, and also the Pittsburgh Project, which is a mission organization that did a lot of work on the north side of Pittsburgh and rehabilitation of homes and things like that.
Yeah, founded by another Presbyterian minister. Wonderful, wonderful outfit.
Very cool. Well, if you could just maybe give us a little bit of background on some of what I just talked about in the introduction and just maybe how the Lord worked in your heart, even from going from the military career and feeling the call to go into ministry, and then how that transpired to get you to First Presbyterian.
Well, I have to say that God has a sense of humor that I can go from 30 years in the Air Force to Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and then being called to one of the historic churches in the country. I always tell people if I can be a minister, anyone can. But I guess the sense of call would be this. My wife usually was the one in our family who, over 18 moves in my Air Force career, she was the one who made sure we went to church. And I always enjoyed church, but when asked to serve in the church, I would say no. I was always learning a new job. So I moved to Montgomery, Alabama in 1999. I knew it was my last assignment in the Air Force, and I made a vow that I would quit making excuses that I was too busy. And when I quit making excuses, God got a hold of me, and people started saying, well, Tom, would you be a deacon? And I shocked them when I said yes. And then I taught Sunday school, and then the minister asked me to preach, and people started saying, well, you found your second career. And so when I quit making excuses that I was too busy, and I realized that both my sons were in high school, they needed to see their dad taking responsibility for faith in the family. I basically left the door open for God to get a hold of me. So again, if I can go to seminary, I used the GI Bill to go to Pittsburgh Seminary, and thought maybe there would be a church that had fallen on hard times. They would be looking for someone a little older who had leadership experience, outside the church. But First Presbyterian Church of Pittsburgh, really one of the great historic churches anywhere, as you pointed out. They were looking for someone with 8 years experience and a proven track record of growing a city center church. And I had no experience as a minister. So again, that's a whole long story how I got called to First Church right here in Pittsburgh, right out of seminary.
Wow. In the book, the part that introduces the church does talk about that storied history with Billy Graham calling it one of the 2 or 3 great churches in America. And I couldn't believe when I read that their roots go back to a prayer meeting in 1758, and then forming in 1773. And one of the things in the chapter it talks about is you saying, it just is the fact that even the service times are engraved in stone out front. Right. So that kind of became a metaphor for what you discovered once you got there.
Well, First Church has not only been written up in Kevin and Jim's book, but it was written up in a book by Grove City professor Gary Scott Smith. And it was called The History of Christianity in Pittsburgh. And First Church, he put on the cover because he says, look, this is the oldest anything in Pittsburgh. It's older than any newspaper, school, bank, or business. And over the years, the people of First Church would tear down a building and build a bigger one on the site. So in 1903, they tore down a 50-year-old building and built what became the structure today. And by the way, every time they had to build a new building, the church was built on the burying ground from the French and Indian War. So they had to dig up the bones of Native Americans and Revolutionary War soldiers and the founders and heroes of Pittsburgh when they built a new building. So there was a time when the church could make radical kind of decisions. But, and in fact, when the church built its current building in 1903, there was a huge exodus from downtown. I don't know if you've ever looked at the history of Pittsburgh, but it was one of the great industrial centers of the world in the late 1800s. Someone described Pittsburgh as hell with the lid off because there was so much smoke from the steel mills and the steamboats. And so churches that could sold their property and moved to the suburbs where it was cleaner and cooler. And First Presbyterian Church could not imagine downtown Pittsburgh without its first church. And so they tore down a 50-year-old building and built a new one. And it was a massive risk, and it was also a massive success. The minister at the time was voted moderator of the Presbyterian General Assembly by acclamation because it was such a success in the early 1900s. And people actually came back downtown to go to church. And so First Presbyterian was the megachurch of its day. And well, over the years, things changed. People, they started taking their kids to little leagues on Sunday mornings, or cheerleader practice, or ice skating, and megachurches sprung up in the suburbs. And so people going back downtown was not a thing people would do anymore. And so when I got to the church, and I think probably that's why they were willing to look at somebody right out of seminary, because the church was about 10% of membership-wise of what it used to be. But when I got there, I found that there was still the structures. There was like 7 checking accounts, and the structure was still in place, as if the CEOs of steel companies were still made up the session of the church. Gotcha. So there was a lot of things that kind of needed to be refreshed.
While they were in that period of transition from how you described it, where people were right there downtown and would just come to church versus they would have to drive in now, it seemed like they did do a lot to keep up what they had, like as far as buildings and the ministries that were directly happening right in the downtown, still in some ways seeking to be, Christ in that community where they were, even prior to you getting there and after, obviously. But
I think yes, that was exactly right. That the church was no longer so much ascending. One of the great things about the church that I loved and I wanted to be, why I wanted to be called there was its great mission history. The Presbyterian World Mission was founded in Western Pennsylvania and came out of the model in the 1830s that met in First Church from the Presbyterian churches in Western Pennsylvania. But now the mission field had become the city itself. And so it was obvious that we had this great facility that was underutilized. And now the church needed to be a mission outpost right where it was planted. Well, if that would have that's always been true. I mean, even in the late 1700s, they were missionaries to the natives and to the settlers. But the idea that we're going to care for the people, the hungry people downtown, that was a little bit offensive to some longtime members who wanted the church to be what it had always been.
Gotcha. Interesting. So after your arrival, maybe talk about what you were sensing and seeing that led you and how the Lord connected you with Kevin and Leighton Ford Ministries. And well, it wasn't called that then, but with Kevin doing what he does.
Right.
And then maybe what transpired in that somewhat.
Well, they tell you in seminary, and it's very, very wise, that people in the church are not going to follow you as a minister until they know you care. They don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so I was not going to try to change anything for a year or even two after I started. And I think I was pretty faithful. Yeah, absolutely. And they were easy to love because again, now these are people that are sticking out in a church when it's kind of hard to go downtown. It was easy to see that one of the strategies was that, remember, Pittsburgh had this big diaspora when the steel industry collapsed. And that's why you mentioned the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's why every city in the country where the Steelers play, there's often almost as many Steeler fans as there are local fans. And that's not because people follow the Steelers, it's because of the diaspora from Pittsburgh.
Gotcha.
And part of the strategy was, or at least the dream was, that people will move back downtown. The city will come back. And it has. It was coming back, except the people coming back downtown were young and unchurched. And you could look at an old historic church, and I always thought, as much as I loved the church, you look up at it from the street, and it looks like Mordor. It looks intimidating, and it would take an effort to get people into the church to see what's going on. And the other piece was people downtown needed to see the church making a difference in the city. And so that's one of the things that comes out in the book, all these partnerships. We were willing to make partnerships with anyone who shared our value because we would rather have them using the building. And okay, maybe we don't agree exactly, but on what this is all about. But people will come in and they will see this church is making a difference. And oh, by the way, if they want to know, it's because of Jesus Christ. Did that kind of get at your I
Yeah,
could
and
I
it's a
could talk to you for hours about any of these questions, Tim.
yeah, it's fun to hear too. It kind of reminds that's kind of a metaphor of what you were doing with the congregation. Now the congregation's going to do to the city. Just show the city that you love them and we're here for you. Our building's available. All of those kinds of things.
Well, it took me, again, a couple years. We had not had a new strategic plan or a mission statement in a long
Mm,
time. And I couldn't find anything from the early 2000s that talked about what the mission was. But there was, I mean, what the strategic plan was. But I did go back and find it from the 1990s. The church had hired a famous, very famous church consultant named Lyle Schaller,
I
and they
remember
had a
that
Lyle
name.
Schaller action committee. And
Mm,
the 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 main lesson from Lyle Schaller was envision your next 500 members and give them what they want.
huh.
Remember, there was a time when pastors of large churches were expected to be CEOs, and we're going to act like CEOs. We're going to offer programs that compete with programs from secular organizations. And that was kind of the model, I guess, the unspoken model that the church had been living with.
Yeah.
And um, I'd kind of become a disciple of Eugene Peterson, and he was a famous Presbyterian minister and author, and he was just death on the idea of pastor as CEO.
Mm,
And so I felt like we needed help in reimagining what God is calling us to do. I
mm,
met Kevin at a conference. I think it was put on by an outfit that was called Presbyterians for Renewal.
mm,
Presbyterians for Renewal. And I heard Kevin, and I was just electrified by his talk.
mm.
My last assignment in the Air Force was teaching strategic leadership to senior officers at a school called the Air War College. So I could connect with all the secular language of mission and vision and strategic planning. But here's Kevin, and he's applying that to the church, but
Mm.
not in a secular way, but in a very thoughtful way. And so I asked Kevin if he would come and give us a proposal for leading a strategic plan at First
Wow.
Church.
Wow. So then you asked Kevin to come, and then he came. So tell us what that process was like, and then what was the result of that?
Well, I would say a couple of things. We live in an era of constant distractions, and we have these phones, right? That every second is we're flipping through, and every couple seconds we've got a new idea, and basically everything that comes on our phones wants to inflame us, and that so we live mad. We basically are mad all the time because that's what phones, that's what social media, that's what the
Mm,
news does. And so I found as I started talking about uh, how do we reach out to the city in new ways while maintaining our focus on Jesus Christ,
mm,
we would be discussing, say, how do we have this consultant come to the church? Well, here was one of my great mistakes. Somebody on the session would say, well, if we do that, so and so tells me that they're going to leave the church and they're going to take 5 people with them.
mm.
And so it was always unsourced, of course. And the great mistake I made was to take that kind of as a personal attack for a long time. And I should have said, that's really interesting, but that's not what we're discussing right now.
Yeah.
So it was almost unconscious that some loving person, who's a wonderful person, who would bring up another topic, I think unknowingly, just to derail um, or put off this decision that we need to make about doing things differently. So maybe
Do you?
that's not quite what you're after, but everybody in the church has something about it that they love and they want to make it, they want to keep it.
I
And
was about to
so,
say, was that a result of resistance to change that they were fearing, I guess?
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And again, one of the mistakes I made, and I maybe the biggest one for years, even though I was a colonel in the Air Force, and even though I had taught this principle in to senior leaders, I would take stuff personally. And of course, I think probably some people would they knew they could get under my skin a little bit. And if I had it to do over again, I would probably have a little better sense of humor and um, not be so uh, bothered by what they said.
Yeah, that's a good word, but that it's so hard to do. I think everyone kind of struggles with that, especially in leadership. It's hard to not think it's coming right here. Yes. So then, when after Kevin got there and began to work with you, what did that look like? And then maybe the results of that in your estimation, looking back on it.
Um, Kevin came in and he gave a pitch to the session, and I was just so excited about it. But I think the session was not originally impressed.
Hmm.
Um, they, I think church bodies are not necessarily enamored of the word strategic or planning, the word strategic or planning. And so it just seems that I think they just want to do church. So the idea that there are things we should gracefully set aside or things we should emphasize, well, let's just keep doing what we're doing. So it took a while. It probably took about a year from the time Kevin first came to the time I convinced them, yes, we should contract with Kevin. We should um, have him work with the church leaders and the staff to come up with a mission statement and a vision statement that describes who we are today. And the brilliant thing was Kevin did not come in like what had been done in the 90s and say, here's your next 500 members, give them what they want. No, he said, what is basically the question was, what is God doing here today? How do you know? How do you see God moving in and through all of you? Where's the energy? Where are the things where are your strengths? And what are the gifts that God has given you? And basically, when Kevin came back later with the report, he was just telling us what we had told him.
Huh.
But he's, you know, such a wise facilitator, so experienced with hundreds and hundreds of churches. And again, it was just so helpful. Everybody said, "Well, yeah, that's what we told him. Of course, we agree with that."
Right.
It was.
And then,
I think the mistake we made then, I think, was not hiring him to hang on and come back, and then work with us. One of the things the session did support was for me to have a coach for a year. And I got to meet with a wonderful guy named Todd Bolsinger every month on the phone for an hour a month for a year. And so basically, my experience over my time as a pastor was working with the very best church consultants and leaders in the country, Kevin Ford and Jim Singleton and Todd Bolsinger. Was blessed to have that as a resource.
if this might be a little off subject, but just personally, and if you feel comfortable answering this, but in that relationship, was was the bigger help the strategy and the nuances of leadership, or was it more the relationship that you had with him, maybe even on a personal level, and just talking about real life and everyday things? Or was it a good
I would
combination of
say,
both?
well, I would say it's the latter. It's the relationship, because
Yeah.
yes, he had ideas, very practical ideas okay, you got, on the one hand, you've got a strategic plan and you've got the big things that you want to do. But then the implementation piece, that's hard. And so he did have specific suggestions, more detailed suggestions, is how do you achieve these big ideas that you say you're called to do. But just as importantly, he would talk me down after a meeting where I had maybe overreacted or lost my temper, or I had to deal with someone who was trying, and I don't want to make it sound too negative about members who don't agree,
Right.
but there's always resistance to change. And so again, if I was taking it personally, that was not helpful at all. And so Todd would help talk me down and help me see the bigger picture. And oh, by the way, you're not the first pastor who's in his second career who thinks this might be easy or thinks you might know what you're doing, who actually don't have a clue.
Right.
And so, again, Todd was really, and I think still is, one of the greats in the country at what he does.
That's one of the focuses of Leighton Ford Ministries, is to be a friend on the journey, an arm around the shoulder. And I think that you've described that beautifully. So after once Kevin had been there and presented to the church, what did it look like? And this can be a quick answer, but just what did that look like then in implementing those things? And what did you see in the church from your first getting there through this process, and then maybe looking back after you left, and what God did?
Well, Kevin would bring the leaders together, and he would break them up, and he would ask them probing questions, and he would just listen to their answers and then synthesize them and give a report. And so everybody got heard. And he spoke personally to the congregation a couple of times, and he just had a very easygoing way of addressing objections. And so I think when he came back and gave the final report, it was everybody said, of course, oh yes. Now, one of the challenges that we had was that there were staff members who had been there a long time who they really did not want to take part in the planning or in the report that Kevin gave. We did not have a big church staff, but they were just vehemently objecting that they should have anything to do with this at all. And after this, we had this wonderful meeting with the session and the deacons of the church and the staff. But the staff cornered Kevin after this briefing. A couple of members of the staff, they were hostile, and they said, "What? Why are we here? We're not members of this church." And Kevin took me aside afterwards and said, "Tom, I've never seen a church where the staff was so hostile to what you're trying to do. You're going to have to work through this." And so eventually, through attrition, those staff members left. And the people, when we brought people on after that, we said, look, we want to know about your relationship with Jesus Christ. And two, we want to make sure that if you're going to be a member of this church, you're going to be part of what you passionately want to be part of what God is doing here in this place. So usually it's the other way around. Usually the staff is the cadre of people who get it, and some members of the church have to come along. But the elders were pretty much on board from the start.
One of the questions I have from the chapter is talking about true north. I don't know if that was a big part of what y'all talked about. It says in this chapter, we talk about a church discovering its true north on their journey to becoming attentive. Did that play a part at all with you and your journey with First Church?
We didn't use that term true north at the time. But in retrospect, having been there 14 and a half years, you could go back and read the history. There's 2 history books of the church. And you go back and look at the history of the church. And true north always was the church's relationship with Jesus Christ. And the minister, when he dedicated the church in 1905, when he dedicated the 4th church building, the one with the worship times carved in stone out front, he said, everything this church does will come out of its relationship with Jesus Christ. And I'm not sure if that's how Kevin uses the term true north, but that's something everybody could agree with, no matter if you were on board with this particular emphasis or not. First Church Pittsburgh was historically the Orthodox center of the Reformed faith in the city. And I don't know how I got called to that. I don't know how in God's providence, but I figured that out. And so in the end, as I look back on it, I really wasn't doing anything new, because this is what God had always called this church to do. And Kevin helped us discern that.
Beautiful story. Did y'all do the church survey, the TCI?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Let's touch on that.
Well, I like that because, again, that's something that members of the church longtime members, older members would be suspicious about. Oh, we're taking a survey. What does this have to do with Jesus? It sure seems pretty secular. But interestingly, it had been 4 years since my predecessor left. And in that time, the interim pastor had brought in another local consultant. They're called Holy Cow Consulting, and they had done a survey. And that consultant said, this is the most change-averse church he ever saw. He said he had percentiles of change aversion. And he said if there could be negative percentiles, this church would get it.
Wow.
and so I think everybody knew that. I would bring that up from time to time. I would tell that you're the minister, you get to tell the stories of the church. You're the one that relates the history. You're the one that can bring up whatever the heroes of the past, the stories of the past. And so I would bring that up all the time. And so here we have the Transforming Church Index that kind of measures the same willingness to change. And you could see that it was very clear, we're way averse to change, and we're really high on biblical orthodoxy. But we did move the needle on that. We did, we were able to show this is how we're faithful to Jesus today. And again, I think that was what was so beautiful about Kevin, is that he helped us discern what God is calling us to do today. He didn't come with a bunch of new ideas. He didn't come with a bunch of new terms that we all have to learn, a new bunch of experiments to try. He showed us through our discernment. He helped us discern together what God was calling us to do.
Wow. Amen.
By the way, as the book says, in a world that we never imagined would be.
It's so true. Yes. Listening and leading in a world we've never known. Subtitle. That's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's Todd Bolsinger's book, Canoeing the Mountains. That's what we're in the wilderness. We're in the mountains, and we've got canoes.
That's right. And
what,
Jim
what are we going to
Singleton
do?
often talks about we're exiles in Babylon now in that same kind of.
Well, and I was fortunate enough in working with the fellowship community that they had an outfit for the time, an initiative for the time called the Elder Leadership Institute, which Jim Singleton led. And
Oh, neat.
so got to hear him lecture a few times and be part of seminars with
Mm,
him. And we brought his outfit into the church. We went to a weekend led by Jim, and then we brought his folks back to the church. So I
mm,
really, really, really feel like that we had the finest leaders
mm.
in our faith tradition helping us in our journey.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for sharing all about that journey today with us. I know it's been a tremendous encouragement to me, just personally getting to know you and be able to share with you today. But I know it's going to be beneficial to the listeners who get to see this and learn about more about the book and what was written about it, but also what you've shared today with First Church and just your experience. I thank you so much for sharing with us and letting us be a part of this.
Well, Tim, thank you for asking. It's great talking with you.
Thank you so much.
LFM's mission is to be a catalyst for mentoring a new generation of healthy leaders who sustain thriving ministries, all for the sake of the gospel. Check out our resources at lfmconnect.org, and we'd love to be a friend on the journey with you. May God bless you.